Well met, everyone. I am Rich the Lich, and today I am doing a review on Jarlaxle's Guide to Traps. This is an 89-page PDF that you can download now on DMsGuild for $9.95. It's currently on sale. You can also get a softcover copy of the book, and you can get a combination package where you'll get both the softcover book and the downloadable PDF. This is a review copy that was sent to me through email, but I ensured that everything that I'm talking about today and the content that you will see on screen and in this video is exactly what you will get should you decide to go out there and purchase this. I'm going to run this through my review system of layout, design, and editing, art, and of course I'll talk about the content. And at the end of it all, I hope to better inform you as to whether or not this might be some content that's a good fit for you and your gaming group. Let's jump into it. First off, thank you so much to Ken Carcas and RP Davis for sending me this review copy. For layout, design, and editing, let's start with the front cover. A very good title up top. I like the choice of font, and there's a good amount of contrast to this wonderful piece of artwork that is here. Here we get the first indication of the overall flow and the vibe that we're trying to capture with this piece, with this blood-stained sort of background here. And I know through email I talked with Ken a little bit, and they had mentioned that the goal was to kind of go back to a little more of old school D&D roots, whereas modern 5th edition D&D is kind of, it's not quite as video gamey as 4th edition was, where it's not feeling like it's just purely arcade and kind of putting down some special cards that you play. 5th edition, though, with the amount of rest and the amount of healing and hit dice, and it's just a lot easier to recover from damage and punishing effects. Where here, it seems like a lot of the traps, and as is captured with the aesthetics here and layout, they're trying to kind of bring about some of that old school D&D feel where it's just a lot deadlier, a lot more lethal. So the bloodstained stuff fits. I will talk about a few hiccups I have with it when we get into the content, but let's just continue moving on. We have a cool credits page, and I like the different uses of bold and regular font style here. Also, as we start to scroll through, you'll notice that the overall layout of the bulk of the content, the written word, is well laid out, and I like the font choice here. It's nice and breathable. It's a little bigger than I typically will see, but I like that a lot. I think it just reads very well. It's easy to navigate my way through the page. There's some pretty good use of sort of heading font styles where you've got this reddish color here in all caps, and then whenever you see here, it's just introduction stuff, but whenever you see the introduction of a new trap, there's always sort of a name or a clever title to that trap. Like this, for example, we have a trap called Bandaloo's Watery Grave, and we have another one called Bell on the Door and whatnot, and Buzz Off Catastrophe. You'll always see this line underneath, and that's how you sort of separate and make that distinction between when you're talking about a brand new trap or you're just trying to give a bunch of information that falls within that. So it does a pretty good job in that regard. Now, there are quite a few little issues where I feel like the editing process needed to happen maybe a second time, kind of gone through with a fine-tooth comb. Because of the strength of this background, where I think the overall aesthetic of this bloodstain, I understand what you're going for, but I think it could have been toned down a little bit more and maybe made a little more, reduce the opacity a little more just to make it kind of ghosted just a bit so that it doesn't contrast and conflict with the presentation of information. Because when you're using this sort of red font here, what happens is you have situations like this, dancing blades, and that D, yes, I can read it, but there's not enough contrast. You can start getting a little bit lost with the color choices because the background is so prevalent and it stands out so much. I get the idea of it, so I think tone it down a little bit. The other thing is you'll notice these lines. Some of these can get lost, and it's that line that sort of delineates and separates between when I'm looking at an entirely new trap versus I'm just getting information about that trap, as is the case here. So I have this trap called Bandaloo's Watery Grave, and as I start to scroll through, you'll notice this is using the same font style. Either use a different font style or just create a little more separation, because this is not, immediately my eye is trying to identify this as the start of a new trap, but this is a component of the Bandaloo's Watery Grave. All in all, the layout is readable, and I can definitely get my way through it, but there are some issues with spacing, and you have some instances where the title of a trap has a lot of words in it, such as this one here. Imitation is the sincerest form of slaughter. Whereas you have another title of a trap is I Believe I Can Fly. When you are creating the same You're conveying the same message. So this is a new trap. You want to keep all aspects of the font the same. Use the same font style, the same bold versus italics. You also want to use the same font size. Where here, the letter form is changed in size because you're trying to have more words. But what happens is you end up with just sort of this weird spacing. So there's little aesthetic things like that. You also have some instances where you have what I call sort of the dangling thought, where this Bernie poison, it definitely needs to be indented and moved over to the top of this column here. Because this is just kind of an important piece of information based on the aesthetics of seeing this kind of bolded reddish font style in all caps, and then there's nothing there that follows. So there's enough instances throughout that have kind of those issues. So that combined with the main issue with layout design and editing, which is the absence of a table of contents. We have a lot of traps here, and everything is sorted by, is it a simple trap? Is it a mechanical trap? Is it a complex one? What's its deadliness level? So is it just sort of moderate? Is it dangerous? Is it deadly? So on and so forth. There's no table of contents, so there's no way for me to efficiently jump and navigate my way through and find exactly what I'm looking for. Traps are also sorted based on sort of levels and tiers of gameplay. So you have some traps that are intended to be for levels 1 through 4, 5 through 10. There's no way for me to separate and navigate my way through and find those. And I think the addition of a table of contents with a little more efficiency in headings and sort of breaking it out into different sections would have really, really jumped this whole content up quite a bit. Because of a bunch of the small little nitpicky things with layout and spacing and whatnot, and the absence of a table of contents, I'm going to give layout design and editing 1 out of 2 possible points. Next, let's talk about the art. So we'll begin with the front cover, which is really, really good. It is brilliant. It's a beautiful piece. You've got Jarlaxle here, and everything just screams to exactly what the title and the content of this document is. He is working on some sort of a trap, so really good piece of artwork. I like the little touch of changing the DMsGuild logo into some sort of a perspective to kind of fit it on the inside of the chest lid there, so really good. Now, as we scroll through, I did mention again the aesthetic, where we've got this kind of blood design motif. I get what you're going for, but I think tone it down a little bit so it doesn't conflict and contrast with the readability of stuff. And also, and I'll kind of latch onto this a bit when we get into the content, the delivery of the information, there's a little bit of inconsistency because of the aesthetic and the overall visual motif we're going for, which is this very lethal assassin blood. I mean, this looks like a very sort of gothic, darker, very serious nature to it with all of the effects that are going on here. As far as artwork itself throughout, there's some decent pieces. The skill level and the quality of craftsmanship is pretty low. It's not right, it's not quite there. There's not a lot of high level illustration and concept work here. But what I do like is if you look at the old school roots of Dungeons and Dragons, it was very much about dungeons and dungeon delving and whatnot. And what better way to populate dungeons than with traps? So I like that a lot of the artwork here, as we look at this piece here, and we have another piece right here. Notice there's a lot of black and white. And it has a little bit more of sort of an elementary feel to the line quality and whatnot of it, but it screams to me of kind of that old school first edition Monster Manual, DMG, Player's Handbook, that type of feel. So it's an entirely subjective thing. I personally like the art style and I think it fits, but from a technical level, there definitely could be some higher quality artwork. It is there for most of the traps. And the other thing I really like is if there's anything that's sort of ambiguous or almost unreadable, I like that they put labels here, like Sound and Fury. And then we've got the Spear Gauntlet, and then we have the Sticky Floor. So I like that. That little identification right there is brilliant just because it removes any, when you have artwork that is not at the front cover level of quality, right? It may be difficult to read exactly what you're looking at, especially when you're dealing with the complexity of a trap. And when you have a label that identifies, hey, you just read about this sticky floor, that's it right there. But for example, with this one right here, yeah, there's some sort of a spike trap at the end there, but it's hard for me to discern based on the title of You Think You're So Clever that this is what we're talking about. So it's cool that you see that label there. But all in all, I mean, I really do have to give, even though the line work quality and the overall skill set of artwork is pretty low, it feels just like the art that was found within those old school late 70s, early 80s D&D books. And because of that, I am actually going to give art 2.5 out of 3 possible points. I think it's there, and there's pieces of artwork for most of the traps that are in here, so it's pretty cool. Let's talk about the content. So when we jump into the content of this, I'm going to kind of keep going back and forth to the layout, design, and editing, the table of contents, things I talked about in other parts of the review, because I believe that's kind of the main issues I have with any of the content here. The content in and of itself, what you're getting on these 89 pages, there's a lot here. There's a lot of interesting traps. There's a lot of possibly usable things, but the delivery of that content through the interface, through the layout and design, and the way things are laid out, and maybe even the wording and the writing style, there's some inconsistencies there. I talk about all the time with content, one of two aspects. Is it something that I can immediately grab and bring and put to my table right now? Is it going to help me get through some hours of gameplay? Because there's no table of contents, you need to really digest and kind of piece out all of the aspects of a certain trap ahead of time, because navigating your way through it at the table space, you're going to lose some pacing and rhythm with your gameplay and your flow. Because there is no table of contents, you're not able to find and separate very quickly the dangerous traps from the deadly traps. You're not able to find the traps that only apply at levels 1 through 4 versus the ones that apply at the highest tier of gameplay. Also, when we flip all the way to the back with the index, this is it. This is what the index is. It's not very efficient. There is no distinction. I mean, it's alphabetized and that's it. But even then, when you look at it alphabetized, the page flow is a little bit wonky, because here you have acoustic crystals at 73, and then the next trap or whatever it may be down is all that glitters on page 14. Why is there such a big gap, yet you're only moving one down, alphabetically? Well, on page 73, first off, when I navigate there, it doesn't go to that. So that's an issue there. But also, when I get through acoustics crystals, those are hazards. Now, if I go back, all that glitters on page 14, okay, well, there it is again. I scroll through. Okay, there it is. That's a trap. But notice, in the index, there isn't anything that indicates the hazard section versus the trap section versus the haunting section, which is a really cool addition to overall content at the back, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So it's alphabetized, but the navigation is not spot on, and there is no other separation. So between a very inefficient index and no table of contents, it's a little bit unwieldy to kind of move my way through this book. The other aspect that kind of is really inconsistent with me is we've got this from sort of page 2, very serious. And I think the intention was there to kind of adhere to that old school 80s roots of darker, not macabre or anything like that, or, negative in any sort of negative connotation, but just very lethal, very dangerous, right? Not as video game arcadey as 5th edition currently is. And you have this blood motif everywhere, and it's so prevalent on all the pages. I mean, it's this stained look. But yet, the presentation of some of the traps are almost kind of whimsical. They're almost more fun-oriented and provided more with entertainment value. So my eye constantly, as I'm navigating my way through the page, I get in kind of that headspace of, ooh, this is really bad. This is lethal. This is something that's going to cause some hesitation, and it's going to cause some stress for my group. And, this is a really cool, intense trap. But then there's sort of a jovial, joking manner to the presentation and the wording. It's almost as though, which I appreciate in the introduction, there's almost like a conversational, like what I call coffee talk, where the designer is just kind of sitting down and just chatting and just shooting the shit with me, when we're talking traps and other things and their ideas and their advices and suggestions. But then when we get into the mechanical bit, sometimes the presentation is very conversational. And I feel like the delivery and the manner in which the writing style is not consistent with the overall sort of seriousness and lethal vibe that the aesthetic is trying to present as well. Also, when we get into certain traps like the doors, just look at kind of the wording through here. The multi-ton doors fall over, smashing the feckless idiots to paste. The players roll all the dice they own and total the result. Yes, all of them, which makes one huge number. That's how much bludgeoning damage the doors deal when they fall on a creature. Creatures can make a DC 20 dex saving throw. On a success, the creature takes half damage, as if that's going to help. Okay, so that's something that might be a little unwieldy, right? That's not going to really fly at all tables, right? It's a little more of a humor element, maybe perhaps for entertainment. There isn't a lot of crunchy mechanical bits that you can chew on there that really feel like they have been run through sort of the playtest system. But yet, it seems to present it as though that's a very lethal thing, right? I mean, that's how much bludgeoning damage they take. It says that's one huge number. So you're probably going to TPK the group. So there's a certain aspect that you need to dial in at that point when you're at the table of, am I ready to end the campaign here? Am I ready for unless the players just absolutely love all dying, it has a little bit of the rocks fall, everyone dies type of concept, but yet the presentation of it, it's kind of talking through it as though it's more of like in a joking manner. and maybe this can be dismissed and, well, the DM doesn't have to use it. But there's just that constant sort of inconsistency throughout as I'm navigating my way through where, yes, the traps are really cool and they're interesting and they spark a lot of creativity, but the delivery throughout is a little bit off. And again, I think it all comes back to the lack of a table of contents and the inefficient index, where the presentation of this content, it can all be here, but if there was sort of a section of like the real meat and potatoes, nuts and bolts, mechanical, complex traps that are really deadly, they go in this section. And through table of contents, I can quickly navigate my way there. But then when I want to be a little more whimsical, a little more entertaining, and sort of even an introduction, again, a coffee talk, where the designer just says, these are things that we think are just fun. Use them if you want to use them. They may not work at every table, but let's have some fun with it. And in that, the writing style and the wording can come off as very conversational and kind of joking, and we're just having fun and just talking. That section could be sort of the fun traps. And I think just separating that too, you still have the same content that's here, which is a lot. There's a lot of cool bits here, but it's just presented in a manner where if that's what I'm looking for, I can go there. If I'm not looking for that style of content or that presentation quality, I don't have to look at the fun stuff. I want just the serious, real old school lethal nature of traps and the bloodstain and all that stuff. But then if I want to get into a little more of the cartoonish, arcadey, just have fun, very kind of, I'm thinking like Looney Tunes-ish, right? In some of these traps and the way you're talking to me and writing it to me, I can go there. But creating that separation. At the back of the book, we have a section called Hauntings, which offers a lot. And I like that it sort of presents it as hauntings are here because they create situations in the environment that can cause a lot of grief, that can cause a lot of problems. So I like that there's sort of the introduction of that as well. So overall for content, there's a lot here. There certainly is. But the presentation, I think it needs to have been run through with maybe another fine-tooth comb or a little bit of editing of not just layout and spacing and font use, but also really add some kind of a table of contents in there or make the index a little more efficient and kind of just dial things down into specific sections so that I can keep a consistent vibe and flow. Because otherwise, as I'm reading through it, I'm kind of all over the place of where should I be? Am I supposed to be very serious and lethal here? Or am I supposed to be like, oh, that's kind of really cool and fun? And I feel like it's coming across kind of in two different ways. So overall, though, the content is good. For content, I'm going to give this 3.5 out of 5 possible points. And this, folks, is my final score. Thanks again to Ken and RP Davis for sending me this review copy. As I said, I'll put some links where you can find more of their stuff and a link in the description as to where you can go and download this today. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.